We have three big topics we're going to do this week, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introing this or anything like that. We're going to dive right in. But the three topics today: the Cold War, Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. Three very important topics to work on today. So let's get rolling with this. First thing to understand as we go through this and as we talk about this is that the Cold War is after World War II, right? So, like, you have to know that it is after World War II. I'm not sure why that's yellow, but it is. Oh, there we go. I can have no background color. That's good. Look at that. I'm learning things today. So, I think that's important to keep in mind, right? Right after World War II is the Cold War. And out of it, the two allies during the war become um, sort of, well, enemies, I guess, during it and or afterwards, sorry. And we end up with, okay, I can't be on the screen at the same time as the text. Interesting. Um, this communist capitalist, East and West. That's important to remember, right? So these are the opposing sides of the Cold War. Soviet Union is communist. That's led by Joseph Stalin in those first years. The United States capitalist. That is led by the United States, right? The United States and the West, Western Europe, and then NATO in the Warsaw Pact are the two opposing alliances of the Cold War. I'm going to settle this over here so it's not distracting. I'm playing around with a new system today. So the battleground of the Cold War, that is Germany. It is Berlin. It is Germany because it's divided West and East. It's divided not communist and communist, just like what we just talked about here. Western Europe, it was the United States and their allies, not communist. Eastern Europe, these nations controlled by the Soviet Union, satellite nations. And so so many things that happened during the Cold War is an example of the containment policy. And this will help you for this Regents exam. It will help you for your US exam next year. The containment policy, trying to stop the spread of communism. And the reason is because of the domino theory. And I know it, at least in my class, we watched a whole lot of video, or we looked at a whole lot of political cartoons with the United States trying to keep dominoes from falling over, right? All these things are examples, and I'm not going to go into detail of each of these events. That's go back through old class materials. But the Berlin airlift was to keep West of Berlin from becoming communist. The Vietnam War was fought to keep South Vietnam from becoming communist. The only example on this list that was not successful. The Korean War fought to keep South Korea from becoming communist. The Cuban Missile Crisis to limit Soviet influence in Cuba. Now, they did not eliminate communism in Cuba. NATO, that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, designed to stop communism from spreading into Western Europe. In the charter of NATO, it says an attack on one is an attack on all. That is a message to the Soviet Union. Look, if you invade West Berlin or if you invade West Germany, the United States and everybody in NATO, but the United States is going to see that as an attack on the United States. So it's going to keep the Soviet Union from being aggressive. Then we get the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. The Marshall Plan gave money to Western Europe to rebuild their economies so that communist revolutions weren't likely to happen there. And then the Truman Doctrine is giving military and economic aid to countries threatened by communism. This in particular was Greece and Turkey. So I will write that there, and you can write it there if you want, because I will include the link to this in the video description on YouTube if you want to download it, if you're not somebody who already has it. Okay, so we will go to the next slide. Why is it not going to the next slide? There we go. Winston Churchill gives a speech where he says, and Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. He is saying on one side is the Soviet Union and their allies, communism, dictatorship, no freedom. On the Western side is not communist, is the United States and their allies. And so it's important to keep in mind as you do this and as you see this that um, the Iron Curtain is like this made up boundary line. Okay, it is a line that just divides those countries. If you looked at a map and you colored all the communist countries red, because red's communism, colored all the not communist countries blue, because blue, not communist, right? It's not red. Um, and you drew a line where those red and blue countries came together, that's the Iron Curtain. It is not the same thing as the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall is a symbol of that, but Churchill gives his speech years and years before the Berlin Wall goes up. So don't confuse them as the same thing. They are not. The Iron Curtain is all of Europe. The Berlin Wall just separates Berlin. Okay, I give you a bunch of examples. If you see any of these things on your Regents exam, these conflicts on your Regents exam, these are all Cold War conflicts, right? Oh man, I am not doing a good job of circling with this mouse pad. Okay, so understand they're all Cold War conflicts. So everything we've talked about associated with the Cold War is a part of this. Okay, I want to talk about a word here: collective security, and you can jot this down on the notes page if you have them. Collective security is just what is in everybody's security interests, right? NATO, a good example. It is ensuring the security of all the members. Joining together ensures everyone's safety and security. Okay, the collective security. That's the idea of what that is supposed to do. Okay, Soviet Union uses the Warsaw Pact to use force in Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. It says to remove threats to communism and to their influence. Then we have the common market, then the European Economic Community, then the European Union, right? It's kind of the evolution of that. And the word you should think of there is interdependence. Remove trade barriers, make easier travel. Again, the common market idea was all of Europe is this same market that maybe can compete with countries like the United States. How does the Cold War end? Well, several things, but think about Mikhail Gorbachev, right? Mikhail Gorbachev, Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost and Perestroika. Free speech and openness, and Perestroika is allowing, it means restructuring, and it means allowing more capitalism, really, and a little more democracy at the local level. So, again, Glasnost means openness. Perestroika, restructuring. This leads to the collapse of the Soviet Union because these satellite nations, they end communism. These Soviet republics break away from the Soviet Union. So Gorbachev, again, he didn't want the Soviet Union to break apart, but it does because of his policies. He said we need these reforms. So if you see Gorbachev on your exam, think Glasnost and think Perestroika. All right, continuing on. Couple other things we'll talk about here. Okay, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany. These symbolize the end of the Cold War, a good turning point. If you need on one of the short answers to write about a turning point, if they give you documents that are related to this, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, you could say those are all turning points. Again, the Regents uses that one sometimes. So if, and they've done this before, document. The first document is about the Iron Curtain. The second document is Mikhail Gorbachev saying something. What is the turning point? The end of the Cold War, right? If you see Slobodan Milosevic's name, you should think genocide. And then Yugoslavia is an example of nationalism dividing. We talked in class, nationalism unites like it did when Germany and France unified, or not France, Germany and Italy unified into countries, and it divides like happened with the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Yugoslavia, right? When all these different ethnic groups want their own nations. Okay, so let's look at this. It's going to be a longer video than I thought. Interactions between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. So, um, something about the Cold War, right? Are we headed toward a new Cold War? Um, New York Times up front, October 10th, 2016, adapted. Okay, but it only goes to 1979 on this list. That was during the Cold War. Cold War is 1945 to like 1990-ish. So let's read the questions first, like we always do. Which foreign policy action best explains the United States response to Cold War situations? Okay, the United States response. What did I say the US policy was? In my head, without even reading the choices, I'm thinking maybe it's containment. Which claim best supports the pattern of interaction between the US and the Soviet Union? Okay, so for this one, we are going to look at it and we're going to just pick out um, what what works the best there, right? We're gonna, what fits with what they give us. And then which document would best provide information about the impact these events had on regions other than the United States and the Soviet Union? Okay, so I am for this one going to look for a place that's not either of those two countries. So let's read what has here. June 1948, the Soviet Union blockades democratic West Berlin. The U.S. and its allies fly in supplies daily to keep the city from starving. The Soviets lift the blockade in May 1949. 1962, U.S. spy planes discover Soviet-built nuclear sites in Cuba. After a tense 13-day standoff with President John F. Kennedy, the Soviets remove the missiles. 1979, Soviet troops invade Afghanistan. Aided by the U.S., Islamic fighters wage a 10-year guerrilla war against the Soviets, who withdraw in 1989. Okay, which foreign policy best explains the United States response to Cold War situations? One, repeated alliance on appeasement. That's during World War II. Not going to work. Consistent attempts to bring about détente. Now, détente is a Cold War word. It means that tensions are relaxing between the Soviet Union and the United States. Well, that's not happening here, right? These are Cold War conflicts. Continuing pursuit of non-alignment. That's a Cold War word as well. Countries like India don't align themselves with the Soviet Union or the United States, but that's not related to what is here. A long-term commitment to containment. There we go. That's why we read the questions first. Because in my head, I thought, oh, the US policy was containment. I didn't read the choices. But then it's confirmed by reading this. So again, even if I don't understand what the text says, I know containment, I get this right. Which claim best supports the pattern of interaction? Wait, why is that? I didn't mean to do that. There we go. Sorry if you saw my whole screen with the thing down at the bottom there. It was blocking the bottom. Hopefully you didn't miss anything. Um, So which supports it? Conflict occurred when one side tried to expand its sphere of influence into another country or region? Maybe. That could be it, right? The Soviets want to control West Berlin. The Soviets put missiles in Cuba. The Soviets invade Afghanistan. So that one could be it. Let's keep reading though. Disagreements between the United States and the Soviet Union were quickly resolved without the deployment of the military. I mean, 1979, the Soviets invade. That doesn't seem like the military wasn't involved, right? So that's not right. Leaders of other countries conflict. Encourage conflict. Ooh. It doesn't say anything about other leaders of other countries here. Peace and stability were created around the world as a result of an alliance. I mean, that one's just silly if you understand the Cold War, right? So we would never pick that. So it confirms what we thought. We always read all four choices, but it confirms that we thought it was one. And then which document best provides information about the impact these events had on regions other than the United States and the Soviet Union? One, a Russian textbook. Okay, when all the Soviet republics break away, all that's left is Russia. So that's not it. A television interview with President John F. Kennedy. That's the United States. That's not going to be it. Memoirs of people living in East Germany, Cuba, and Afghanistan. Oh, that might give me information about places other than the Soviet Union and the United States. A line graph of the Soviet Union's gross domestic product. I'm not even going to finish reading the years. That's the Soviet Union, right? So it is indeed three. Again, we read all four choices. Let's look at this one. Okay, I see Gorbachev. Farewell address. I think Glasnost. I think Perestroika. I think also, as we talk about this, I don't know why it keeps doing that to me. Um, it says which policy did Mikhail Gorbachev initiate during his presidency that contributed to the situation described in this excerpt? It's his farewell address, and this is a fairly common document. What is the significance of his speech? Okay, I'm going to slide this out of the way here. There we go. I think you're just bound to see the bottom here. So you know when I recorded this. Um, which policy did he initiate? Okay, so dear fellow countrymen, compatriots, due to the situation which has evolved as a result of the formation of the Commonwealth of Independent States, I hereby discontinue my activities at the post of the President of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. I am making this decision on considerations of principle. I firmly came out in favor of the independence of nation and sovereignty for the republics. At the same time, I support the preservation of the Union State and the integrity of this country. The developments took a different course. The policy prevailed of dismembering this country and disuniting the state, which is something I cannot subscribe to. Okay, disuniting the state, the dissolving of the Soviet Union, it sounds like. Okay, so which policy? I'm not going to read through all four. Always read through all four, but I'm already 16 minutes in here. So we're going to just go ahead and say it's glasnost. That's what it is. Let's see, what is significant about the speech? It led to a new nuclear arms race. Nope, the opposite is true. It signaled the end of the Cold War. Ding, ding, ding. There we go. Gorbachev, glasnost, perestroika, Cold War over. It predicted the eventual worldwide spread of communism. No, it did not. It caused new countries to become part. The opposite is what the end is talking about. So no, that is not true. Okay, let's talk about Gandhi quickly. You see Gandhi's name, you should think civil disobedience. I know, a lot of highlighting. He wanted independence, so he is an example of nationalism. Anybody who wants independence, anybody who wants to get rid of foreign control is nationalism. The if you end up writing about Gandhi for anything at all, you can structure your writing in this way. He was a pacifist, meaning he rejected war or violence. For example, he followed passive resistance, which is resisting authority in nonviolent ways, such as boycotts. Now, he says, hey, Indians, you should make your own cloth, don't buy British cloth. Imperialism, in a past video, imperialism is about making money. M&M, money in markets. And if they can't sell their goods to me, or M&M Materials and Markets, sorry. They can't sell their goods. I'm not a good market if they can't sell things to us. So we're encouraging people to spin their own cloth. And there's a lot of pictures of Gandhi at the spinning wheel. Whenever he was interviewed, he was like, I'm going to spin cloth. So they see pictures of me doing what I say. He would go on hunger strikes, right? Resisting in nonviolent ways. And then civil disobedience, refusal to obey a law you consider unjust. And the example of this is the Salt March. So if you see the Salt March, or if you see anything involving Gandhi in a march, it's probably the Salt March, and you should immediately think civil disobedience. You need to know that term. You need to. Okay? So, back to this. Hey, look at this. The March to the Sea. This is going to be civil disobedience. This is the Salt March. So there we go. The actions taken by Gandhi reflect his commitment to which policy? His three words, pacifist, passive resistance, civil disobedience. One of these things is probably the answer to this, but we're not going to read the choices yet. The actions of Gandhi and his supporters, as described in this passage, helped lead to the. Okay. Interesting. I'm thinking it's probably independence for India, but let's see what it is. For a fortnight, Gandhi's march is intended to be only a demonstration. Then, when he expects to be at the sea, he will begin to produce salt, so now we know it's the Salt March, from brine or salt water, and so infringe or violate the government salt monopoly. Define the government to arrest and punish him. At the same time, his supporters everywhere have been incited by him to refuse to pay local taxes, which is illegal. The actions are, it is civil disobedience. So there we go. I'm not going to always read all choices. Again, for time, we're not. The actions of Gandhi and his supporters, as described in this passage, help lead to the banning of Western books and music. Doesn't make sense. Removal of British control from the subcontinent. Okay. I wish they had just said independence. Britain leaves India, right? They give India their independence. That's the answer. I don't like that they worded it weird, but the removal of the British, right? India's independence, the British are gone. That's what that means. That's the correct answer. Development of an economic alliance for South Asian nations? Nope. The peaceful partitioning of British India and India and Pakistan. I remember a lot of students pick this. The opposite happens. When India gains their independence, there's violence between Pakistan and India, between the Hindus and Muslims, as they're going, like Muslims going to Pakistan, Hindus going to India. A lot of violence ensues. In fact, Gandhi is assassinated by a Hindu extremist during this violence. All right, now Nelson Mandela and apartheid. So if you see Nelson Mandela on your exam, think apartheid. You see apartheid, think Nelson Mandela. Okay, gonna move out of the way. There we go. So apartheid is a system of complete separation of the races, or segregation. It's a word that roughly means apartness or separateness. We don't really have an exact translatable word to that, but keeping apart, keeping separate, right? The white minority rules over the black majority in South Africa. And this goes, um, up into the 1990s. Black South Africans live on homelands, poor agricultural lands, not a lot of resources. Carry passbooks saying where they worked and where they lived. They could not marry whites. They couldn't make the same wage even if they were working the same jobs. There were literally laws that said you cannot pay black workers and white workers the same wage. They were segregated in public spaces. So this is not a review of apartheid. This is a multiple choice level knowledge. So recognize these things, be aware of it. But it would make a good enduring issue if it's about human rights violations. Talk about apartheid. You could also talk about Gandhi in the last little bit, right? India being a colony and being mistreated by the British. That would work. But if you write an enduring issues essay, one of the things is like efforts of people to address this issue. And so we have international pressure, boycotting South African companies, divesting their investments in South African companies. They were banned from competing at a lot of international sporting events, including the Olympics. Nelson Mandela was arrested for protesting apartheid and for his actions with the African National Congress, which I will write on here as well. I will put an S there. I will move it. The African National Congress, or the ANC, again, working against apartheid. Because of his imprisonment, he becomes a symbol of the anti-apartheid movement. And, long story short, he gets released and the end of apartheid happens. F.W. de Klerk, the other guy highlighted here, he ends up, he is president at the time apartheid ends. He announces that there will be an election where all races can vote. And Nelson Mandela, it becomes the first black president in the first election where all South Africans could vote. Okay. So let's do this. Trevor Noah, Born a Crime, Stories from his South African Childhood. So here's the deal. There is a lot of history and culture in South Africa, but this is about getting ready for your Regents exam. If there's a question about South Africa, and again, the country of South Africa on your Regents exam, the odds are decent, like pretty good. It has something to do with apartheid. Now, obviously, you read the context. It could be just a general question about the economy or anything like that, resources. However, probably about apartheid. According to this author, how did the minority white population maintain control over the majority black population in South Africa? Okay. I mean, now we know it's apartheid as long as you remember what apartheid is. Since the end of apartheid, okay, well, they've given you enough clues that this is about apartheid, but you need to know some stuff. Which problem continues to exist? Okay, good question, gives an opportunity to talk about something. Let's read the document. The genius of apartheid was convincing people who were the overwhelming majority to turn on each other. So how did they maintain control? Okay. Hate is what it was. You separate people into groups and make them hate one another so you can run them all. Again, that first question, how did they maintain control? At the time, black South Africans outnumbered white South Africans nearly 5-1. Yet we were divided to different tribes for different languages. I apologize if some of these are some of these are probably going to be mispronunciations, but I'm going to try my best. Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, Sotho, Venda, Ndebele, Songa, Pedi, and more. Long before apartheid existed, these tribal factions clashed and warred with one another. Then white rule used that animosity or hatred to divide and conquer. That was a strategy we talked about the British using all over the place, right? In India with Hindus and Muslims. Divide and rule. All non-whites were systematically classified into various groups and subgroups. Then these groups were given differing levels of rights and privileges in order to keep them at odds. So how did they control? Number one, this is 27, through military conscription of black South Africans. Doesn't talk about that. Through divide and conquer techniques that kept the tribes at odds. I mean, it literally says they used that hatred to divide and conquer. That's the answer, but let's keep reading. By enforcing the use of tribal languages so tribes could not communicate. Nope, doesn't say anything about that. By allowing democracy within localized areas of the black South African community. I mean, that's the last thing they did, right? They didn't do that at all until they end apartheid. Since the end of apartheid, which problem continues to exist? Okay, so inability of non-whites to vote in elections? Nope, all races can vote. We talked about that. Restricting educational instructions to Afrikaans? Nope. Again, that's been ended. Monopolizing of political power by white South Africans? No, the opposite happens. All races can vote. Political's government. So we've now eliminated three choices, right? So if you don't know this, and you might not, you've eliminated three, so we know it. The persistence of segregation as a result of economic inequalities. Banning apartheid doesn't mean everything's good. It doesn't mean everybody just like moves and they all move together. It doesn't mean everybody gets good jobs. It doesn't mean that person that didn't have any land suddenly has a ton of land. It doesn't mean the generational wealth that these white families have goes to these black South African families that had nothing. There's still a lot of economic inequality that is often racial and segregated, right? Okay, so that is that. We're not going to talk about short answer 2. That was in this slideshow. We'll do that in class. So that is this. A lot of stuff. I thought this was going to be quick because I didn't think I had a lot of time, but this was over 27 minutes long. All right, good luck. 3 big topics again. For the exam. I'll put this in a playlist with the other videos we've made so far on these other big topics.